Okay, so Piaget's metaphor of the child, or the person for that matter, is not rats and pigeons, it's not computers, it's the little scientist. His idea of the child is that children construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiencing new things and reflecting on those experiences, basically through trial and error. And this is his idea about how people learn and how people develop, cognitively speaking. So the idea is the perfect example is the little child building block towers. Okay, so the little kid, at first, when little children try to build block towers, they don't know that you can't put, for example, a cylindrical block on top of a square block. It rolls. They find that out by doing it over and over and finding out it doesn't work. Okay, they start, they will put like one block here, and then they'll put another block with just a little bit of the block overlapping that first block, and of course it falls down. They learn that you have to build towers straight if they're going to stay up. So by trial and error, by being the little scientist, they discover, even though they would not have names for these things, all kinds of things about center of gravity and friction and planes while they're sitting there building their blocks. Okay? So this is, several of you said that the big problem with behaviorism and information processing is how does anything new ever get discovered or learned? And this is where the constructivists come in. Piaget's quote here, the principal goal of education is to create men and women, of course, but you know, he wrote a long time ago, who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done, men who are creative, inventive, and discoverers. Okay, so Piaget has two big theories that he's very, very well known for. One of them is his stage theory in terms of cognitive development of children, and we're going to look at that in a minute. But a neglected theory of his, which is really much more powerful and important in his work, I think, is his theory of learning. He believes that basically, and this comes from his work as a biologist, is that individuals learn in order to adapt to their environment. Therefore, if you're in your environment and everything is going the way you want it to and the way you expect it to, if you're the little kid and you're building the block tower and all the blocks are staying where where you want them to be, you do not experience anything, any angst, any problem. He called it disequilibrium. Okay? The world is doing just what you want it to, just what you expect it to, and therefore you don't really learn anything during that process. He says learning only occurs when you experience disequilibrium. In other words, you do something and the world kicks back at you something you didn't expect. The little kid tries to put the block on top of the other blocks, but because it's off center, the block falls down. Ah, disequilibrium. I didn't expect that. I didn't want that to happen. Now I have to learn. And he had basically two ways that he talked about people learning. There are three possible responses to disequilibrium, and two of them result in learning, the other one does not. The first response to disequilibrium is that you try to assimilate knowledge into your previous knowledge structures. In other words, this weird thing has happened and I try to explain it using the knowledge I already have. And Piaget named these knowledge structures in your head schemes, which closely resembles schemas, which is a term you may have heard. Okay, in fact, it's a term that we now use in information processing too. But they're really the same thing. People are just using slightly different names because after all, Piaget wrote in French, and so everything's translated anyway. All right, if you can't explain what's happening using your current schemes, your current knowledge structures, then what you do is you change your knowledge structure to include what has happened, to understand what has happened. And this is the most important kind of learning, obviously. There is a third choice, and this is what happens when disequilibrium is too powerful. People simply reject the new knowledge. They do not learn. They refuse to acknowledge what happened and they avoid it. So let's look at a different example of a scheme here. Again, I'm going to talk about little kids because they're easiest, okay? Little kids have a scheme of dog. Many little kids have a scheme of dog. They have a dog at home maybe. It's a pet, people have said, this is a doggy. Okay, so in the little kid's scheme of dog is, a certain size, furry, 4 legs, may bark, might be friendly, a lot of different things in that little kid's scheme of dog. Okay, now the first time that a little kid sees a cat, very often they call it a doggy. Okay? Um, and their mama says, no, that's not a doggy, that's a kitty. Ah, disequilibrium. We expected that all four-footed furry things were dogs. They're not. Oops. So, the first thing that the kid tried to do was assimilate that weird-looking cat into his previous scheme. He called it a dog. That didn't work, so now he's got to change his schemes. He's got to develop an overall four-footed furry scheme, and then underneath, one for dog, one for cat. Okay? And then the little kid might be driving out in the car and see a bunch of cows in the field. Little kid points at the cows and says, doggy? Okay, once again, he's never seen a dog that big, but in that new experience, that slight disequilibrium, he tries to assimilate that experience into his previous schemes. Okay, I've never seen one that big, I'm feeling a little odd about it, but okay, I'm going to decide it's a doggy. So that's why he goes, doggy? Usually, like question mark? And mom again says, no honey, that's not a dog, that's a cow. At which point little child is completely confused because now there are doggies and kitties and cows, and it takes a while to sort all this out, but the sorting out is accommodation, okay? Now little kids are very tolerant of disequilibrium because they have to be to learn. So they hardly ever reject new knowledge, but the older you get, typically the less tolerant you are of disequilibrium. So if you feel that this disequilibrium is too much, then you reject that new knowledge. And you see this all the time, even in older children, which is what we look at when we look at conceptual change teaching, but especially in much older people. It's something I like to call hardening of the schemas, okay? As you get older. Also, temperamentally, some people can put up with more disequilibrium than other people. So some people, when they hear something that really contradicts something that they've always believed, are going to say, no, I don't care what the teacher says. I don't care what the book says. That's nonsense. I'm not listening to that. You will notice that coming up in the current election. Just take a good look. But other people are much more open to ambiguity and disequilibrium, just temperamentally. They're just better at this, or they have more experience with it. So it's easier for them to step back and say, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I need to look at this again. Maybe there's more here than I knew. So it's a question of age, but it's more a question of temperament. But definitely a question of age in the sense that very young children are very accustomed to disequilibrium because the whole world doesn't make sense to them. So that's the only way they learn. Let's look at a very young person's example of assimilation and accommodation here. Okay, here's a baby. Banging is a favorite scheme that is used by babies to explore their world. It's one of the earliest schemes they learn. It's a very primitive scheme, okay? They find that if you take something and hit it on something, it makes a noise, and they love that, okay? So here's this little kid banging her rattle, bang, 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 probably on her table or maybe her high chair tray. And if you hand her a block, one of the things she will do after she puts it in her mouth, which is, by the way, a scheme that comes with us built in. That's how we learn to eat. We don't have to learn that one. Little babies put everything in their mouths to see if maybe it might be edible. Survival counts. Okay, but you hand her a block, and after she's put it in her mouth, she'll often bang it on something. She assimilates, okay, the block is a source of disequilibrium at first. She's never seen one, so she says, well, I'll try what I already know about. I'll try to eat it. No, that didn't work. Okay, I'll try banging it. And she assimilates that block into her banging scheme. Okay? Now, if anybody is so foolish as to this is the kind of thing that uncles do or grandparents do in a moment of evil hilarity or evil amusement. Mothers rarely appreciate this kind of thing. Okay, somebody gives her an egg. She tries to bang that. She wants to assimilate that egg into her banging scheme. It doesn't work. So now she has to accommodate that scheme. She has to say, okay, not everything that feels hard can be banged. Some things cannot be banged. So we have just seen assimilation and accommodation as a response to disequilibrium.